It's Thursday, and you know what that means? This is Geek Speak, and today we are going to be talking about Google Analytics, how to get started with it, and what you're going to do with it in order to start measuring your success. And to start off, it's going to be myself, Phelan Lewis. I work at Seymour Digital Media, where we focus on search engine marketing. And today I'm going to be joined by.
Me, Greg McKinnon. I run Original 72 Creative, and we're a full service website graphic design and digital marketing firm in Vancouver.
Yeah, perfect. And so today we're going to be talking about Google Analytics, which I think is the most common analytics that most people will install. And we're going to go over, how to get started with it because there's been some slight changes with it. Why, and also kind of some of the parts about, what should you spend your time looking at? Because there's some areas, there's a lot of information there, and where should you be focusing your efforts on? So I guess to start it off, like, how are you going to get it installed? And so one of the big things with the new part is that they have two different Google Analytics tags. So there's going to be one is going to be your traditional Google Analytics, which is your UA, and then or Universal Analytics, and then your alternative is going to be the new one called Google Analytics 4. So when you're one thing to keep in mind, just off the bat, is when you're creating a new account, they're going to kind of shuffle you through this process. But in the second tab, when you get down, there's going to be a little option that says show advanced options. Super important, because if you click on that, you'll actually be able to, if you don't click on that, you'll just create a Google Analytics 4 tag, which is fine, but it's just for people getting started. I strongly recommend having both because Google Analytics, the UA one, is much more stable. Google Analytics 4, they're still building. It's still in beta. There's a lot of stuff that's still growing. So if you're learning, I wouldn't recommend that part. But if you click on the show advanced options, you can create both tags at the same time.
It's kind of interesting that when GA4 first was released, there was like a mad push from Google to make sure everybody got set up like
Yeah.
immediately, like, and by the way you seem to be talking is like it's not, it's ready but it's not fully ready. So why was, like, I'm wondering why they had such a big push when it was first released to like try, like they made it seem like the original analytics was gonna go away like soon.
Yeah, it's kind of it's definitely was a weird push. I think it's definitely in the mold that Google does these weird things where they kind of come up with a new version of it. Also, just to keep in mind, just the history of it, it's actually was called Firebase Analytics originally. So it was meant for their kind of self-serve, fully hosted for apps, and then it became web and app analytics, and then it became Google Analytics 4. So they've been kind of pushing it closer to being a replacement overall. And my guess it has something to do with as they're pushing more to integrate both Firebase and all their apps that they're hosting as well as the websites. That's kind of my guess. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely kind of weird because it's such a core component to Google to having Google Analytics stable and on people's websites because they're going to be anonymizing that data and using it for their own research. So it was kind of surprising that they would be pushing so hard for something that was pretty core to their systems. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's definitely one when it first came out. It's also still beta, and so a lot of the features and documentation, especially, which is even more important than the features themselves, is how to actually even do things in the platform that wasn't there. Like it just was not built or ready for people who weren't using apps. So that was something to kind of keep in mind is that the first person, the primary user of it is someone who's building a Firebase app who wants to find out where people are clicking on screens and going through tutorials and leveling up and all that stuff because a lot of those event triggers are all built in already. So it's
Mhm.
kind of it was more suited for that. And then now they're trying to like Frankenstein this together where it's going to do both at the same time, and so it's got some growing pains.
Yeah, so I mean, the good thing about having both set up, when it first got released, and even now continuing to set up both, is that you will have your information tracking in both. If you set up GA4 right away, it will start tracking data from when you set it up, so that when you actually do transition to it, you'll have a lot of that history. And to do it now as well, setting up the Google Analytics 4 as well as the Universal, you'll have the same thing. At least you'll have both tracking
Yeah.
immediately. Maybe you'll be able to get more information in the Universal initially, but you still have all of your data tracking in GA4. So when you do a full switch and dedicate to only that one, it's got all of that information for you. So good point in telling people to get both of them set up still.
Yeah, exactly. Because we don't know how they're going to do the switch. I'm going to. I'm sure that they're going to not just make it an abrupt change, but it's better safe than sorry, right? Is to have some sort of historical data that you could work with, because we just don't know what they're going to do when they do that maneuver. So it's better to just have it running in the background. You'll thank yourself later if there's ever any issues and they're just like have some weird abrupt change. But yeah, for the most part, I would just have Google Analytics for kind of running in the background, because while it is cool, it the feature set is still changing, and we've noticed a lot of changes on the platform. So it's definitely one where I recommend holding off until you're much more comfortable with Google, the universal one, because there's just the features are more stable, and it's always better to learn on a stable platform that's not changing all the time, that has really good documentation, than to try and learn this brand new thing that, while it's new and flashy, it's going to make it harder for you to learn the new platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. All right, what else we have
Well,
for
the next
basic
thing, the
analytics?
next part is like, well, now that you got your code, obviously you're gonna need to install it. And so this is where there's multiple different ways to install it, depending on your platform, of course. WordPress, of course, there are many different ways to install it. You could hard code it into the theme, which I don't recommend, but some people do that. And you can also use something like a header footer plugin. There's a bunch of them out there. They're nice and stable. They just kind of tap into the existing the WP head, just kind of inject the code there.
I would, on that point, before you continue, I would recommend people look at their theme and see if there is a option to do that
Yeah,
before going and installing a header footer plugin, because a lot of times the themes do have that feature in them by default, so you can get away with not having another plugin to install and update all
yeah.
the time.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. It's definitely one where, if you can do that, it's going to be something called like additional scripts or something like that. And it'll be in the customized theme feature, and you'll just go in and, usually a lot of the really robust themes do a really good job at this point. But some of the smaller ones or ones that aren't as robust, you'll need to add an additional plugin. And definitely, if you can avoid it, do. This is the main takeaway we want you to have, is the less kind of mucking around you have to do, and use whatever's already built into the systems that you have, the better, because no point in adding more stuff when you don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the optimal way to add Google Analytics and Google Analytics 4 is, of course, using it through Tag Manager, which you would install that very similar to how you would have installed the Google Analytics tag, but it's going to house all of your tags. And that's kind of a conversation for a different day, but it's definitely the optimal way to do it, because you can do other cool stuff like event tracking and all kinds of cool stuff with Tag Manager. So that's the optimal way to do it. But of course, you can just install the tag and then start tracking information from there.
Perfect.
Yeah, and so now that we kind of have the Google Analytics code installed, well, like the big thing is you're collecting data. You're seeing your numbers, you're getting your average time on page, you're getting the number of pages people are visiting, and then you're kind of wondering to yourself, uh,
What
you
does all
know,
this mean?
what am I supposed to do with this? It's kind of like, that's always the one. It took me a really long time to open up Google Analytics, not have my eyes roll in the back of my head with just seeing all these numbers and then just closing it. And so this is definitely one where there's a couple of things that you're going to want to take a look at. One is definitely going to be the page that you will spend I spend almost 75% of my time, almost 90, is in a tab under acquisition. So you go acquisition, all acquisition, all traffic, source and medium. And what that means, the source and medium, that's the key to why Google Analytics is really good. Because when we were prepping for this, I was telling you we had a client who was running a bunch. She ran an e-commerce store, and she was running just a ton of Instagram ads. And it was driving. You'd see these numbers are like 4,000, 5,000 people coming to her site, but it didn't convert, like maybe one or two conversions. So she was dumping a ton of money into Facebook ads, but you would see this big table and see Instagram ads, and then you would go across and conversion rate 0.1%, just like absolutely abysmal conversion rate. Well, then we looked at, her Google Shopping ads. Well, they were doing really well, and they were costing a fraction as much, because you could see, oh, this was the amount of traffic was getting a great click-through rate. That click-through rate had a great conversion rate. So that flow was really good. So we could see, okay, stop spending money on Instagram ads or reposition the Instagram ads. So this is what the whole point of why Google Analytics is really good, is because you're finding out where you're spending money and effort, even if you're doing organic stuff, where are you getting traffic from, and how well are they converting? How well are they taking that next step you want them to take? And which, of course, one thing to note in that, when I was talking about the sales, in Shopify, if you go under online store and preferences, you can put in the UA tag, and they'll take care of all your e-commerce, add to cart, view product. They'll take care of feeding all that information to your Google Analytics, so it can make it easy for you to see source and medium versus how many sales you actually get. So that could be really useful for you as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do they, Greg, because I know you do much more with WooCommerce, do they have some sort of like the tracking on that? How does that work with like e-commerce tracking on Google Analytics there?
Yeah. Well, there's basically an additional plugin to install to make sure you get the proper shop tracking information in WooCommerce. It's in the WooCommerce repository. It's free to set
Nice.
up to make sure that it's getting the information from your site into your analytics.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, because I definitely wanted to make sure that the WooCommerce people are covered here as well, with making sure that they're getting their e-commerce, they're figuring out where they're spending money on their
Yeah,
ads.
and besides that, the WooCommerce will track all of that information as well. But I highly recommend in your Google Analytics to actually set up sales goals as well,
Yeah, yeah.
and just make sure all of that e-commerce tracking is turned on in your analytics, because I don't think it's turned on by default. So
No,
make sure
no.
that stuff is turned on and tracking, and this plugin will then give you the ability for that to be sent into your analytics. And then once you have it, you can see funnels and everything, and where people are dropping off. It's really good information to see. I mean, it might give you an idea of your people drop off after adding something to cart and filling in their information because your shipping rates are too high,
Yeah.
and then people are dropping off and not completing. But without this valuable information in your analytics, you can't tell where people are maybe dropping off the funnel. So it gives you really good information of what is happening through the process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, oh, someone was asking, what was that plugin only for WooCommerce? Uh,
Off the top of my head, I don't remember what it's called, but I can look it up and post it in the comments when we're done the
yeah,
live here. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, and for Shopify, they do it kind of out of the box as well. It's a little tab under online store and preferences, and then you just pop in the code, and it just does the rest of that part as well. Very similar.
And
Sounds like
it's a free plugin as
yeah.
well. It's not a paid plugin.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it makes sense. That
as far as I recall.
yeah, no, I remember finding it as well in the WooCommerce, like their own built library that they have for free. I remember finding it when I had set one up myself.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and also just going off of what Greg had said as well in your Google Analytics, that's in the view settings. You'll see something called e-commerce settings. That's where you click on enable enhanced e-commerce. So that's again your add to carts, your view products, your checkouts, whatever the steps are up until transaction. And so that does a lot. That just kind of tracks that part. And if you ever want to look at that information, then you will find it under. If you go under conversions, that's the tab. So and we talked about acquisitions at the start. If you go under conversions, there'll be goals, which we talked about with a transaction itself, like a completed goal. But also
Mhm.
there's one called e-commerce, and that kind of funnels all of that information together of how many people are adding to cart and making those funnels. And so it does a lot of that stuff in Google Analytics for you there. And so really useful there. Also, underneath of that is a really cool one, is multi-channel funnel. So once you've set up a goal, like a transaction, which the goals you set up in your view, meaning like if someone makes it to page that says /checkout, then that counts as a goal. And then what you can do once you've set up goals is that Google Analytics will tag them, each step, each point that they've made contact with your website along the journey. And so you can see, oh, they saw, a Facebook ad, came to my site, went away. They got a Google, a remarketing ad for Google Display that brought them back. Then they came back with a regular Google ad, and then they converted. And so you can see each step that it took and how many steps along the way. And so very useful is the multi-channel funnel. I've really found it useful for getting an idea on how many steps is it taking, what's the journey that people are taking, or how many steps is it taking, and also it will show you the time lag. So how many points between point A and point B, what was the time frame between those two, which can be kind of interesting for people, especially if you've got higher ticket items. Maybe it takes more points of contact, and figure out other ways like that. So again, we're talking about ways where, much like how Greg was talking about the checkout, you're also trying to figure out what's the distance between these things? What are other things I could do in between? Someone was just asking, where do I find the multi-channel funnel? It's under conversions, and conversions will open up goals, e-commerce, and multi-channel funnel. And then underneath of that, you can with the multi-channel funnel, that's where you can kind of see a bunch of these visualizations, and you can play around with the information there as well. So super cool
I
stuff.
see. I see a comment here from Aura, who isn't using WooCommerce, but is doing a checkout through Thinkific. I'm assuming Thinkific is something possibly that goes somewhere else other than her site and maybe comes back. But regardless, if you want to see some type of a funnel, you can set up a goal in the process that you have that people follow on your website.
Yeah.
And even if it goes somewhere else and then comes back, you can set that up as the goal, so that you can get the analytics within Google to show the the path that they took. Even if it leaves and then comes back, you'll be able to see if that goal gets completed, them going through that funnel, how where they're dropping off or where maybe they're jumping back in. So definitely look at setting up a goal with the steps of like each page that they go to, and then the final one, and that'll start tracking the process on your site.
Yeah. I did find something here about an order form as well. So I will post that in the notes or the comments after we're done here, because it looks like they do have one. But yeah, definitely what Greg said, super important. If you can, even if you're just mapping out the next stages, that that they make it to this page and the Google Analytics is tracking it, you can have little steps the whole way along and count each one of them as a goal as well. If they're not out of the box setting up like an e-commerce, like a traditional enhanced e-commerce of like input, information, input, credit card detail or payment processing page, make it to shipping page, maybe you're not doing that. It's a little bit different, especially if you're doing, courses that it might just be like an order page. Then you're going to need to do read through your analytics, especially if you go to, I totally know this one off the top of my head. You go to behavior and then you go to site content and then you go to all pages and you can actually see, you can even do something. The other one is just above it, above site content, called behavior flow. And you can actually see how people make it through your site. So it's kind of like makes it into a giant web. It can be a bit confusing the first time you use it and just kind of playing around with what the input is. But basically you can see like, oh, they came from a Facebook ad and the Facebook ad all leads to this page and they went from that page to this, or they all dropped off. And so you can also see kind of drop off points as well, which can be super useful for you to kind of start to analyze like, oh, hey, I'm running all this traffic to this page, but 90% of it drops off. Maybe you got to retweak the messaging on the page and on the ad, run one test, run another, figure out which part is working better. So there's lots of ways you can start to analyze not only like what's the click-through rate on your ads. So that means that your messaging is working, but now that you've done that, now they're not taking the next step on the page that you're on. Well, now I need to make sure that my messaging lines up with what's on that ad, because people like the ad, but they weren't liking the landing page. So that kind of tells you, oh, if they're not following through, then I need to start like doing a bit of an analysis on this as well, and just sort of figure out like, if people are making it here, but they're not making steps to where I think they should, then this is where the Google Analytics help you out. And also the good part about Google Analytics is time on page. You get to see, oh, they're spending a ton of time on the page, but they're not taking the next action. Well, maybe I need to add more calls to action. There's lots of stuff that we can figure out where we start to look at, you break down the analytics that it's like, oh, they feel like they're getting the thing they want, but they're not taking the next step. Okay, well, that means I got to work on that part of it. And so that can help you with analyzing.
I just want to follow up with Aura's follow-up question was, if at all possible, if there is some type of a step-by-step, to add that as your pages. So basically put the flow of, if they need to go to a category page and then to a product page and then to, like, they've added to their cart page and then they've checked out. Don't just put the checkout page as the goal. Have that as the goal to be the end page, but try to put in previous steps if there are previous steps to get to that final page, if you have them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I would set it up that, like Greg was saying, you might, because if you're doing a course, it's not a traditional e-commerce because you're not doing shipping. You might just only have the payments page and then, a thank you page. So you'll have like your, maybe your cart page and then your payment processing page and then your thank you page. And then you want to have each one of those three as your goal so that you can start to make a funnel out of this. So you can see, oh, people made it to product page, but then they didn't make the next step to the cart page and then to the processing page. So you can start to see the steps and they're kind of conversions along this journey, because you might have to build it where you're using these kind of, they call them like micro conversions, I've heard them called as well, which that are steps along the way to the transaction itself. And if you're doing stuff, again, like anything with a digital, like learning platform, anything like that, you need to build the funnel a little differently than in a more conventional e-commerce funnel.
Another thing, just I thought I'd point out, since we're talking about funnels and steps to goal completions, is don't have too many. If you're setting up a goal and you're like, okay, well they have to go to this page and then this page and then this page and then I convert them, ever along the whole line there's an option for them to drop off.
Yeah.
So try to make your funnel quicker and more to the point to when they actually purchase or sign up for something. Don't have too many steps, because along the way, at any step, they could drop off. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, and one thing that I was going to mention that it pairs really nicely with what we're talking about here is in the property section, you can set up audiences. So this is remarketing audiences you can build inside of Google Analytics. So what's really good about this is that, you could drive Facebook traffic and then Google Analytics will capture that traffic if, so you could say they make it to your landing page, but they don't go to your cart page. So you could do an if or statement and then use it based on what's in your funnel. If they've made it to product or your landing page, but not to cart page, we'll put them into this audience, and then you could send them, display ads, YouTube ads. Like you can do other things with that now that you've got an audience built there, and so it's definitely one where the audiences pair really nicely with what we're talking about with kind of a built funnel. Is that because you're already making any person who makes it to slash cart page but not slash thank you page, we'll put them into an audience, and then that way you can, and again, this is a bit more advanced doing this kind of like detailed segmenting, but it's something to keep in mind, is that you can double the work you're doing here to build audiences. And then like we talked about, I think the last time I was on, that we were talking about segmenting, super powerful stuff where you can really speak to people at this point in the funnel. And so maybe they don't see the value. You can go through and send them testimonial videos where you talk to people and they talk about, how you've changed them with the course and what they've got out of it.
I like that we talked about analytics and setting up goals, because it led to funnels, which made me realize funnels would actually be probably a good topic to have on its own geek speak, to
Oh yeah.
the setup of funnels to convert products or services on your site. So we should mark that one down for a future episode.
Yeah. Well, put that one down with segmenting because it kind of pairs with segmenting, but they're different. Like they work together, but they're like definitely a little bit differently. So yeah, definitely one I would be interested in exploring in the future.
Well, we got a little bit off track there on a little bit more stuff than just analytics, but and we're running close to out of time here. Do you have any other points that we needed to kind of get through
So
before?
one other one, I just wanted to address it because sometimes people really like this part, but the audience tab in Google Analytics, it can be very useful, but I do not really use it as much because I use it more as a guideline. So this will
Mm.
tell you, gender, age, the one that's actually is very interesting that's in Google Analytics that we also use in our Google Ads is in market audiences. So what's cool about them is in market means that someone has gone on a Google search for a specific type of product. So, it could be, we had a gaming company who does VR stuff we were talking to, and they, you look at their analytics and it turns out computer peripherals were something that would show up, which would make sense, right? If you're doing VR, it has peripherals. And so, but there's other things that might show up. They might have like they're looking for work. People are going through changes, and so they might be playing video games as they're going through work, and it's a way that they kind of relieve pressure of doing that grind. So there's other ways that you can see in market audiences, and these, from what I understand, is a bit more accurate because they are people who've put up their hand and said, they've typed into Google looking for things in this field. So that's something I would also take a look at as well, which some people can find some really interesting data in there. It's not that I wouldn't swear by any of it, but it's definitely interesting to know it's out there.
Yeah, I think what I sort of realized with Google Analytics is there's a lot of basic information that you can comb through that give you a real overview. But if you want to really do a deep dive and get meaningful information, you need to really set up your own filters that are in there, or use something like, I know you guys use Data Studio a lot to really take that, all of the information that is in there, and create proper reports to give you a clear picture of what it is that you're looking to find out based on what you're doing on your site.
Yeah, yeah, and I would go even just building off of that. The other one that we've really been using a lot of is heat mapping tools and record screen recordings. So using Microsoft Clarity, because they've built a new version of it, and it's got a really healthy free tier, which is awesome. But really get some. So if you've got like your e-commerce store, you're not converting, you're wondering why. Well, if you set up a Microsoft Clarity, it's very similar to Hotjar, and you'll see where people are clicking, what they're doing. We had people that they would scroll up, scroll down, and just back out of the page that we were hoping them to convert on. So like you can see how people are interacting with your page, and that will give you the micro to what Greg was saying was the macro, where it's all you're aggregating this data and you're getting these segments and you're doing that kind of stuff. So using all these tools together, you can get a really good idea of how people are interacting with your website.
Yeah, good tip. Heat maps are great, actually.
Yeah,
I don't use them nearly enough.
it's one I didn't up until I started working a lot with e-commerce companies and marketing, and it's a godsend. It's just absolutely a must-have because because they anonymize everything, so you don't actually know who the person is, which is really good. You've got a nice distance from it, but you still get that really valuable, detailed information of how they're interacting with their website and what are they clicking on. Even have some really cool stuff they have called rage clicks. So, if someone clicks a bunch of times in a row, meaning like a button doesn't work, well, that's something really valuable for you to know. And so,
Right.
yeah, it's really cool stuff like that Microsoft's built out, and I'm a little surprised Google hasn't themselves, but I'm sure that they are working on it or acquiring someone who has.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So
Awesome.
I think we are at time today. And so I think that just leaves it for us to say that we're super happy to have this discussion today. I thought it was really awesome.
If anyone has any more questions, if you guys watch the replay, feel free to put them in the chat in the comments, and
Yeah.
we'll see it, and we'll answer any question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so again, my name is Phelan from Seymour Digital Media.
And I'm Greg from Original 72.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye, guys.